In this episode of the podcast, I spoke to Dean McKillop. Dean, along with his wife Lizzy, are co-founders of Flex Success, an online contest prep company. Dean has a Bachelor Degree in Human Movement and Exercise Science. He has been coaching within the health and fitness industry for more than 10 years, bringing a wealth of knowledge to his clients and through his other various forms of social media. You were fortunate enough to have one athlete you're prepping at the moment who was in the Olympia, I think, recently. So how exciting is it for you over the last sort of 8 years, 10 years, I think it is, since the start of Flex Success, to have gotten to a point now where you've got some athletes you're able to coach to the top echelon of the sport?
Man, kind of surreal, I guess. Surreal, but then also not. I was actually talking to my wife yesterday about this and saying, I feel like my life's trajectory has kind of just followed as I expected it to. Whether or not I was going to be involved in sport personally or actively involved in it as a coach to people, I always saw myself coaching elite guys. It started off initially in more of the performance space. My expectations were that I'd probably coach in strength and conditioning in elite Australian sports. And my first sort of exposure to that was in rugby league. But it's very, very, very humbling to be able to coach the quality of guys that I do now, and also to be able to niche as hard as I have over the last 4 or 5 years. You mentioned, I've been coaching now for 8+ years. The business has been open for about that same time. I started off with a bit of a mix between competitors and just people that were interested in getting, specific physique goals. And now I'm niched to the point of I only coach exclusively men who compete in untested federations. And I used to coach women too, but now it's niched right up, and I love it. So
There's a couple of things I want to delve into there. You mentioned rugby league. I understand, I think you're a level 1 Australian Strength and Conditioning Association accredited. So I guess in your time working, with some NRL or National Rugby League athletes, is there any principles there that you've applied to your own training? Has that influenced any of the concepts you've sort of integrated in your philosophies with bodybuilding?
I wouldn't directly say that there has been. My exposure there was I did my prac at the Brisbane Broncos. I had to do 400 hours of unpaid prac for my university degree. And then I stayed on for longer after that for general and more experience. Yeah. What that undeniably taught me, obviously, there was the importance of performance in regards to its capacity to manipulate how you perform, obviously, but also the physiques that was achieving, was undeniable. The Broncos boys at that time were a very fit squad, a very lean squad, a very muscular squad. And they were fortunate enough to have at the time, undeniably the greatest Australian strength and conditioning coach there in Dan Baker. And he's heavily influenced the Australian strength and conditioning industry. So that importance of performance and effort was very important, and I think that was probably something that was ingrained from the very beginning. And understanding that as much as bodybuilding bodybuilding obviously requires weight training. That's a fundamental principle of growing muscle tissue. But I think we can get caught on both sides. You can go very powerlifter-esque and go we just need to move from A to B in regards to exercise prescription. And I think that's important, but not probably the greatest approach mentally for a bodybuilder. And then you can go the other realm and be when you really slow down the negative and just over exaggerate and over accentuate perfect repetitions. And what that sort of sports performance domain taught me was controlled with power, controlled and purposeful. And that's always been a part of my prescription in regards to weight training.
I was listening to a podcast you're on recently with one of your clients, and you're talking about whether you think there's a benefit to improving, maximal anaerobic performance in bodybuilding. So doing short, intermittent interval training, for instance, as a form of cardiovascular training. Do you think that has any prospective benefits for bodybuilders in terms of their own, conditioning, especially when you're working with athletes like you are who are enhanced, and it comes with a whole host of potential other side effects or consequences associated with the use of PEDs?
Mm. Um, I like the saying, but I also think there's problems in the saying of success leaves clues.
Yeah.
Because there's problems in that, people can have success, at least on the surface, but use completely horrendous protocols and follow zero principles and just get lucky. And they could also be, internally very unhealthy. So maybe just because, Mr. Olympia of the 90s trains like this doesn't mean that that's necessarily the greatest way to train.
Yeah.
So, okay. So, but it does leave, if we would assume that they were doing things right, it does leave clues. So like one thing that I reference a lot, especially with guys, I've seemingly had like quite a few guys that have had knee issues in the past or an inability to train legs in a more of a traditional sense. And that is that if you look at like track cyclists, they do a lot of volume on the bike under heavy amounts of resistance, but the repetition quantity would be astronomical if you were to like liken it to weight training. And then they do like very limited, but very strength and power-based weight training. So they have weight training for power and for power output, and performance support. And then they have track work, which is specific to what they're trying to achieve. And if you look at those guys, like where they train and what they look like muscularly, always phenomenal legs. Now, maybe they have a genetic predisposition to being incredible cyclists, and that's how they grow tissue. So we can probably say that's not necessarily like the most perfect evidence, but like if we're leaning on this sort of empirical evidence, it suggests that there's still always going to be a like metabolic or anaerobic component to maximizing growth potential. And I think like if you then like mechanistically understand, the benefits of anaerobic training, specifically in the legs, let's just say in this instance, like you are driving more than likely greater mitochondrial biogenesis or efficiency. So like the working cell of the muscle tissue, you get more of them and they become more effective and more efficient at utilizing energy. If you can do that, then technically you have greater growth potential. The question though then is like how do you implement this concept into weight training and also not gas the individual? Because you mentioned like my guys, they're all big guys typically by a default of like what they should be naturally. And anaerobic training puts more demand on the heart, which is positive, but also only to a point. Because sometimes they're just bigger individuals are under more stress, and driving tremendous amounts of stress with more cardio work is not necessarily the smartest choice either. Like maybe we're putting them at a greater risk for things like athlete's heart or left ventricular hypertrophy and that. So it is a bit of a, you got to toggle between like what adaptation you're trying to achieve and then where does it sit within the entirety of that programming. But I still think there is some benefit to having a greater anaerobic capacity, because if you do, you're going to have a greater quantity of, larger muscle fibers and fast twitch muscle fibers that are going to grow. You're going to have, more efficient performance. Technically, you'll become, really efficient at burning through glucose. So you won't deplete glycogen as much if you're more efficient at that. You then will also generally then burn more fat at rest if you're anaerobically fitter. So there's a whole host of advantages to being cardiovascularly and cardiorespiratorily fit.
I guess it's one of those things, right? As you say, success leaves clues. I love that. I love that saying. But for years and years and years, there's been this growing up. It's probably dead and buried now, but the concept that resistance training at an early age stunts your growth. And then we look at, you look at all the weightlifters in the Olympics, and they're all short, blocky, and the reason I guess that we've kind of formed that assumption, they've stunned their growth at an early age because that's the way they are, when in reality their biology kind of suits their participation in that sport. And it's almost like you look at track cyclists in the velodrome as well, and these guys that have really a lot of quadricep mass. How much, I guess, of that when you're coaching an athlete coming in to become an enhanced bodybuilder, moving out of the natural realms of the sport, how much does that come into the initial, I guess, discussion or consideration with the athlete around, because bodybuilding is such a subjective sport, and depending on your structure or your biology, that's also one really massive consideration, because we look at the guys like Phil Heath and Jay Cutler and these guys over time that have been Mr. Olympia for years on years and have top quality genetics, like the top 0.1% of the world. Is this a discussion you have frequently with athletes about the potential for them to achieve greatness as an enhanced bodybuilder based on their genetics, and then to what extent, I guess, the biology or the environment, like the food, the training, the sleep, can actually influence their progress? When do you have that kind of reality check with the client, and how much of a consideration is it?
Mm. So I think just to quickly touch on that, because I think it's actually an important point, the bringing up of like elite athletes, and like, did the sport choose the athlete, or did the athlete choose the sport, or is there issue? This is like a fairly common fallacy known as, I think, the hindsight bias.
Yeah.
Where we have hindsight and we go, oh, that's why, that's the reason why. But like, no. You're just assuming that it is because we have this. So like, what people didn't realize is, the 10 elite powerlifters that are all short were also competing against 10 other guys at the same age. And then those 10 guys diverted in a different direction. Yeah. And it's like, they probably went to something that they're more biomechanically suited to. Like, so there's a hindsight bias. We have a lot of this in our lives. With regards to, like, man, it's a really tough question and a tough situation to forecast someone's genuine capacity to become an elite level untested bodybuilder. Now, you can certainly look at structure, like having wide clavicles relative to their waists, to where the muscle inserts, the shape of it, et cetera, et cetera. Those things certainly can be seen relatively early. But I was going to say, but what you can't see is necessarily the person's capacity to grow in the presence of drugs, and also their capacity to tolerate the potential side effects of those drugs.
Yeah.
That one is very unknown. You can get an elite natural level bodybuilder who you think, if they've got that now, if you just, drop in a little bit of spicy creatine, as some people would call it, they're gonna become monsters. And it's not necessarily always the case. They may actually just be one of the unfortunate people that get a ton of side effects and not a lot of growth.
Yeah.
And then conversely to that, you can have somebody who really kind of doesn't look like they're going to have that much potential, and then their capacity to grow in the presence of like super physiological levels of drugs is something that you would never have picked.
Yeah.
The only thing that doesn't change between both of those scenarios, though, is the potential for greatness in regards to shape, structure, because those genetically will never change. I think a really good example of this, there's two very good examples of this actually right now in the elite bodybuilding realm, and that is you have Samson Dowder, who even from the very beginning, when he wasn't that popular, you could see that he had shape and structure. It was just a matter of time and seeing whether or not the drugs would do their thing. And now you're starting to see that come to full fruition. Like the shape and structure is still there. The muscle just keeps getting bigger. He just looks more ridiculous.
And I think it's one of those. Yeah. Sorry to jump in, mate. You look at Samson, and I think he started actually taking PEDs at the age of 28, I think it was. And it's more common than ever now, I think, for a lot of people to start taking PEDs in their early 20s. What's your, I guess you're going to continue on there, but what's your perspective on like building a solid training foundation, and how much time should you ideally be training hard naturally before you take that route? Or is that even a consideration?
Yeah. So quickly, the second person I was going to say is Nick Walker. Like if you look at his initial competitive career, structurally and muscle sort of shape and size, you're like, probably not going to become anything too special. Yeah. And I would argue that he still has the same shape and size, and he still has the same downfall in regards to leg shape and size, and those things will never change, which are going to limit his potential to be the best of the best. But his capacity to grow muscle is obviously significantly better than most people. And you probably would never have noticed that or known that when you initially looked at him. So just like anything, man, like someone can, take 100 milligrams of caffeine and not sleep, even if they had it 8 hours prior. Someone can take 100 milligrams of caffeine before they go to bed and sleep perfectly fine. Drug metabolism is vastly different for each individual, despite the fact that we're all pretty much the same kind of person inside out. As for like whether or not you should have a base of training and or like how long, I absolutely think even if you try and take drugs and skip the sort of like learning process of training, most of the time, if I've ever seen anybody take drugs too early in their training career, and if I was to put an arbitrary number on it, like, less than 5 years of really good quality training, what you'll typically see is like the physique just kind of looks a bit messy and it looks like needs time. You'll see very large quads. You'll see very large biceps. You'll see very large delts, but what you won't see is like a very large brachialis. You won't see a noticeably separated sort of sartorius. You won't see like the little bits and pieces. Even things like, serratus development will be underdone. They'll just be looking like they've kind of got these chunks of muscles slapped on that have just been prime movers, and there's no time for the extra shit to catch up.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have time. You're gonna be reliant upon time. Now, take out the genetic elite; like they don't exist in this conversation, right? Time is still going to be something that you need. Hormonally, there's been an argument as to whether or not you should take exogenous hormones before you're fully developed. Internally, I could probably say that that's a smart choice. I think we live in a society where people are like in a hurry. And as someone who's 19 thinks he wants to be a professional, he thinks, I've got to be there tomorrow, and they like chase that too quickly. And this is another good example from Samson, man. He's started late. He's been incredibly successful. He's coming into a time in bodybuilding where it's financially very viable to have this as a proper career, albeit via not necessarily just earning from competition winnings, but also from sponsorships. Yeah. That you don't now have to like do this by the age of 25 anymore. Like you don't have to be at the top by 30 so that you can be done by 35, like the previous pros of the years really were doing. So that's a good thing, because it means people can start later and make sure that this is legitimately what they want to do. Take drugs and basically decrease your lifespan. That's what you're doing if you take steroids. Now, exercising is going to improve your lifespan, but being genetically larger than you are, supposed to be, is without a shadow of a doubt detrimental to your health.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like a lot of people think it's like, it is to some extent the drugs and the side effects of those, but more often than not, it's just how much muscle mass and body weight the individual is carrying the most part of their like off season period. So like one of your clients you're coaching at the moment, I think he won the heavyweight title at the IFBB Nationals this year. Mike Pearson,
yeah, he did one super heavies, yeah.
Super heavyweight, and he's like 150 kilos in his off season.
He's currently 146 kilos yesterday morning. Yeah.
So like carrying that body weight around, regardless of the PEDs, I guess that's the main influence over your deterioration in health as you age as a bodybuilder, right?
Yeah, unless you do everything you possibly can to offset that additional stress, because that's what we're talking about. It's about like the relative stress on the physique per like square centimeter that exists. Your heart, when you matured at the age of 25, was at a size that was sufficient to uphold the demands of your body at the age of 25 at that body weight.
Yeah.
If we assume that you were natural. For me, man, that was like 77 kilograms, 78 kilograms maybe. And now my casual walk around weight now, like as a retired amateur bodybuilder, is like 93 to 94 kilos, but it's still 20% beyond what my natural capacity was.
Yeah.
So with greater demand comes, as you can imagine, like if you had, a handle attached to a cog that had a certain resistance profile on it, and that cog was designed to turn at that rate and it could manage that resistance, and then you go dial the resistance up, that handle's probably going to snap. That's essentially what you're doing by putting more weight on the physique.
And one of the things that obviously one of the massive considerations around becoming an enhanced bodybuilder is obviously, getting your blood work done and being really disciplined, not only in your training, diet, sleep, those kind of things, but also like getting your pathology done, crossing your T's, dotting your I's, applying due diligence to that kind of thing. A lot of what people don't see, they see obviously the competitions and all the social media, Instagram kind of things, but behind the scenes, talk us through the requirements that you actually need to take on board if you are going to take that route with your training towards the enhanced side of things, in terms of getting your blood work done and that kind of thing. Because I think when we look at it and we say it may be coming with these side effects, health consequences, but on the other side of the coin, a lot of these guys that you're working with are extremely diligent with everything they do in their life, attention to detail, with a remarkable number of facets of their health, whether it comes, as I said, sleep, training, nutrition, all these kind of things. So how much does that come into play when you're working with these athletes? Can maybe just explain for the listeners, those that are not as well versed in this space, what it kind of requires of the athlete?
So the same health concerns that exist for general population exist for the bodybuilders that are taking PEDs. The difference is that when you take PEDs, you're dialing up the likelihood of some of those negatives coming on quicker or being around for longer. And some of them do it directly. So, for example, there's a couple of key facets, I think, in like health metrics that people can pay attention to that would decrease the likelihood of like long-term risk profile for all-cause mortality, let's just say. One of them is going to be blood pressure. That one's everyone. If you've got a genetic predisposition to high blood pressure, you already started a deficit to your health, unfortunately, and there's going to be some things you're going to have to work on to improve that. So blood pressure is one. That's a problem for most people, but most people have pretty good blood pressure. It's a problem for everyone. If you take steroids, by default of taking steroids, the mechanism of action of some of the things that they do at different receptors increases the likelihood of blood pressure rising just by default of just putting it in your body. So you again, now you're starting with the additional consideration of, oh, there's this blood pressure thing, which they call the silent killer, which may increase my risk profile for cardiovascular disease long-term. And just by virtue of taking the drugs that I need to grow the muscle that I have is already now starting to like say, hey, there's some resistance against this. So that's number one. So you may need to do some additional, for example, what we'd refer to as like parasympathetic work, relaxative work, things like saunas, breathing, meditations, low intensity cardiorespiratory training. These are things that you may just have to do just to offset the negative of steroids, especially if you've got a genetic predisposition to high blood pressure. So there's a lot of time and effort involved in that. Another one is blood sugar regulation. This isn't directly affected by steroids, but it is largely affected by body fat accumulation, and also like exposure to extreme overconsumption of food for long periods of time. So the old like dreamer bulk concept of the bodybuilder, probably not a smart idea for these reasons, but typically I don't see this one skew too far. But it's a problem because it damages cells. High blood sugar for a long period of time damages cells, and cell damage is going to cause you problems long term. And then the one of the other major ones is lipid profile. A natural bodybuilder typically is not going to have to worry about this again, unless there's a genetic predisposition to what they call like dyslipidemia. Most specifically LDL, which is like air quote, the bad cholesterol. It's the cholesterol that gives your body the opportunity to deposit plaque inside the arterial walls, which can then lead to eventually like some form of accumulation of that plaque and like maybe like atherosclerosis and or like a stroke or something like this. Steroids typically will increase LDL, and then they'll also simultaneously decrease HDL, which is what's referred to as the good cholesterol.
Yep.
The thing about HDL nowadays, though, at least from all of the people that I read and the things that I read, is HDL has like a relatable expectation to long-term health, in that people with high HDL typically have high quality heart health, but it's largely impacted by exercise, and it's also correlative in that the people that have the healthiest sort of cardiovascular systems also typically have the highest HDL. But by default, they almost also already have low LDL, and LDL now has been differentiated from HDL as an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, which means even if you have high HDL, it doesn't matter. So long as your LDL is not going beyond like a certain capacity, it's the independent risk factor. So LDL is the one that we really need to control for, more so than HDL. You could technically have low LDL and low HDL, and you'd be better off than what you would be having, say, high HDL and high LDL. LDL being high is the problematic one. And steroids increase that in of itself just by default of taking them too. Now, only to a small degree, unless, again, you're genetically predisposed to it. But we now got like out of the three majors, that the fourth one would be resting heart rate from a health metrics. And again, androgenic steroids are sympathetically stressful. So that they're going to drive up resting heart rate to a point, and so is being larger. So the demands on the body goes up, so the resting heart rate goes up. So they're your four really, really good quality, easy to measure health metrics that may determine your risk profile for long-term cardiovascular disease or all-cause mortality. And out of the 4, only one of them, blood sugar, doesn't have a like relatable effect. Also, doesn't have an effect that's related to steroids being taken. So we're talking about like a 75% out of the 100 that are possible, that by virtue of taking steroids, you're already negatively affecting.
Yeah.
So it doesn't come with that consequence.
Yeah. You talk, one of your philosophies is for what benefit to consequence.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on the benefit versus the consequence, you kind of weigh these considerations up on a weekly basis when you're working with your clients. One of those things would have to come into the mix would be like steady state cardio or energy output through step count throughout a day. So in that concept, obviously there's a benefit there to improving heart health and cardiovascular health for someone who is taking PEDs and increasing their body size by a large proportion year in, year out over a longer period of time. But there's also, I guess, the consequence of excessive amounts of cardio when you're trying to build mass in a gaining phase. So I guess, where do you kind of draw the line, and what's that look like with your athletes, particularly when they're in a building phase in not the off season, but the improvement season? How do you kind of find that balance there too, between managing heart health but also trying to continue to build size?
Yeah. So the sentence I typically use is like, for what benefit, at what cost?
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose like what you're asking is like, how do we potentially manipulate or how do we manipulate or account for the potential interference effect of cardio on hypertrophy? The short answer to that is that drugs will probably overpower that to a significant degree. So like as a drug taking, bodybuilder, you can typically do more cardio and not have to worry about the interference effect. It's not like we're asking them to run marathons, but you can probably do a bit more.
Yeah.
The anabolic stimulus of steroids is substantial. However, my entire philosophy, I think, on if I actually think about it, generally speaking, in training, in cardio, in even doing the things that are good for your health, in steroid taking, you name it, is minimum effective dose is always the ideal situation, and scale up on an as needed basis. So like if I can give somebody 20 minutes of cardio twice a week and their resting heart rate's great, their blood pressure's great, they feel fit, they're not out of breath, they can walk upstairs, tie up their shoes, and all of their blood work is great, and then they can train really, really hard 5 days a week, 2 by 20 is fine by me, But usually, like, if we look at Lenton research, it might be like, usually you need somewhere in the like 80 to 120 minutes of exposure throughout the course of the week. So like most people might need 4 or 5 sessions, but if I can give them 2 sessions, I will. So that's how I go about the entire process, man. It's the same for weight training. Like, if I can give somebody 50 sets a week and they get really significant growth, then what I'm really doing is saying efficient growth now, opportunity for growth later is even greater, because now we have another like lever that we can pull on, or a thread that we can pull on. I can add more training volume. I can add more cardio. We could add more drugs. But always, minimum effective dose for all of them.
One of the things, I think you've kind of built a bit of a reputation in your early days for calling out a lot of bullshit in the industry in the early days when you were sort of making a name for yourself. I think one of the things I remember I was at Plus Fitness and I had Instagram open, and at the time there was a few guys I was training around at Kingdom Gym on the Northern Beaches. I think Jesse Bonnar and Mitch Corton, a few of these other guys that might have prepped with you. And I remember we were chatting about the Halo Top story. I think you posted about how there was the calories didn't actually align with the macronutrient profile on the back of the tub, and we found that quite funny. But like, what would be your tips, I guess, for other coaches and individuals in the industry that are looking to, I guess, build their profile or their presence, when it comes to, I guess, being yourself, being authentic, maintaining your integrity in an industry that is becoming more and more saturated every year that goes by?
I'm not sure if I'd take my approach that I took. I'm not sure if my approach was actually consciously thought out either, if I'm honest. Like as a personality type, I enjoy poking the bear. I'm not somebody who is easily offended. Therefore, when I go on the front foot, my expectation is that people should be the same, even though I know it's not actually a fair, expectation. I also have always been somebody who's been brought up to, speak in the presence of injustice. So I'm not somebody who will sit back and see, not say that Halo Top is injustice by any means.
Oh, that was just a bit of a joke.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just for the reference point for the people listening. But if I see injustice, I'll call it out. Like, it doesn't problem me. And it's the same thing. Like, if I see people that are being sold a lie, like, you need to do X, Y, and Z in order to achieve this. Or like back when I came up, it was very much the case that if you were following any kind of a flexible nutrition approach, you were deemed to be a nonce. Like, you were soft. You just can't handle bodybuilding. And I'm like, hang on a minute, like. We're not about to tell people and call people out on their personal self here. Like, you can skin a cat many different ways, especially when I, at least on paper at that stage, thought that doesn't make sense. So I've never had a problem challenging, I think, authority if I think that authority is bullshitting. Whether or not that's the greatest approach now, I think it will get you popularity. But what it typically does, though, is just get you more popularity for the people that already follow you. And it doesn't necessarily get you any greater credibility by doing that approach. What I think is a smarter approach is asking more questions as opposed to telling people why they're wrong. Because if we would assume that somebody is saying something, I would like to think that they believe it is true. I would like to think that people that are saying, for example, you should eat 5 meals a day because it stokes the metabolism. Like, I hope that they think that that's true. I would like to think that they're not trying to say that just to get likes or because they, don't believe it, but they think it'll get them more clients. But if you ask this person more questions, technically, if they're good at what they do, or they're a good coach or a good person, they will be able to change their mind, or they're open to their mind being changed in the presence of new evidence. So if you ask more questions, not only will you help the person who's potentially giving bad advice, but it would also be seen, like, especially if then the questions lead to questions being asked of you, and then you can start to educate because you've actually been like invited to do so, then you'll build a bit of a, maybe a little bit of a profile that way. But the space now is different to when I came up, man. Like, Instagram and the social space now is very, very, very image driven. Like, I built my coaching business, and we collectively at Flex actually built our coaching business on education, providing knowledge for free, giving really good content. And from that, people sought out our services. I think if you did that in isolation right now, it's probably going to be more difficult to get clients because people want to see the results, not just hear about it. And then also, like, most people that you're trying to attract aren't looking for information. They're looking for results. So it's very difficult. So it kind of depends on who you want to align with. If I was to just push on education really hard right now, the people that I'd actually primarily be speaking to would be probably the people that listen to this podcast and other coaches. It more than likely wouldn't get me other clients. But, if I was to do this now, so, but I think, I think one of the words you said before, which I think is super important, is to maintain integrity. The more lies you tell, the more lies you got to tell to cover. If you're just a genuinely good person, you actually care about the people that you're trying to coach, that means you will seek out additional information if you don't know the answer. It means that you'll say, I don't know, when you're not sure. And you'll usually have an approach that is focused around cause no harm first, and then and move forward. And if you're good at it, people will refer. And then the question is like, I don't know, like, how popular do you want to be? I don't really care about the popularity. I just want to coach good people. So I don't need a ton of clients, so I can rely upon referrals,
Well, I think your confidence grows with your results. It was kind of like what you said before, success leaves clues. So the more and more repetitions you get in with dialing clients in and getting them stage ready and winning competitions, and I think that's, you don't really need to explain yourself then. Like, you have the results, you have the backing behind you of all of these other professionals who could easily probably likely coach themselves. Like the people that come to you, a lot of them would have backgrounds in exercise science, physiology, have been training in bodybuilding for decades. And it must be nice to have them come to you and know that you have their trust to get them in shape.
Yeah, man. There's people where I thought, oh, I'm surprised that person has sought me out, or I thought they had pretty well locked down of what they needed. But everybody needs something. That's the thing,
It's the discipline, the accountability oftentimes as well.
Yeah, or even if you have somebody that's a very good bodybuilder and they're adamant about their training quality and all the rest of it, sometimes they just need to be told when to do less. That's one of the biggest things, is an inability to switch off the emotional attachment to bodybuilding, because bodybuilders, I would say, are typically quite emotion-driven individuals. At least the men that I coach are.
Yeah. I saw a story Jay Cutler post on his Instagram story the other day. He's doing a variation of tricep push down where you've probably seen it, some YouTube video before, where he puts his whole body weight over the cable and basically the cable's brushing beside his neck every rep and he's, pushing down like that. And he sort of said before he did the rep, like, I get a few haters, saying my technique, but hey, mate, how many Olympias have you won kind of thing? It's like, you can't really hate on someone who's been to the top, achieved what they have. And so I think that's one of the things, like as you build confidence, your success leaves clues and you're able to, I think, then start to experiment more, try new things like, like fat loading or whatever, different strategies or techniques with different athletes to kind of build or garner more respect from those in the fitness or health community. So is there any other key learnings you've kind of through that time? Like, has there been any times where you've kind of had to, face criticism, and what would be your approaches on that or your advice?
Oh, I've certainly had a couple of instances in my prep coaching career where like the result hasn't been what I expected it to be, or there's been a negative result, right? Where someone's like health has shifted. I think the only thing that you can do at that time is just ask like enough questions of yourself to determine whether or not there was something you could have done better. I certainly, I haven't gone the poke approach like you said for a while, and that's one big thing that I did learn, especially even from the influence of my wife. If I'm honest, is like ask more questions instead of telling people what they're doing wrong. And I just found that to be incredibly like far, far, far more effective in regards to having valuable, purposeful, and like actually effective conversations. As a because just poking is just fun. But it's fun for what benefit? Like you get a bit of a laugh for a while, but does it actually achieve anything? I don't know. Like not really. Whereas like if you see someone giving bad advice, and you're thinking, okay, this person is exposed to a lot of people, I'd much rather know that if I could put questions on that exposure, that the people that are following them may then also start to question that individual. Yeah. Whereas if you just go after the individual, the little like followers are just going to then go after you.
Yeah.
But be curious would be one thing. Like be inquisitive, always try and find out something extra and some new. If something is like considered to be the normal approach, but there still is like scientific reason to try a different approach, then there's no reason to say that you shouldn't do that. Fat loading is one of the ones that I think that you mentioned. There's actually like a good reference in that. It is likely the case that most individuals will look better eating more carbohydrates coming into a show, but sometimes it's not. And trust your eye. That's the most difficult thing as a beginning coach, is to go, this doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And I still deal and still contend with this idea now as somebody who's been doing this a long time. I'll give you an example. One of my clients who I have had to struggle to get him to weight for the IFBB elite division, Joe, he's from Belgium. He's a classic competitor. We have struggled to get him to weight every year. Luckily for him, though, for Classic, he usually gets to weigh in like 2 days before. So my first time that I ever got to get him to weight, I got him to weight. He looked good. His condition was pretty good. And then I was like, cool, I've got 2 days now. I can put a little bit of carbohydrates in and we'll go from there. And he looked really good, but he progressively lost a bit of detail. I was like, oh, interesting. Like maybe it's a carbohydrate issue, maybe it's a fluid balance issue, because we usually have to do some form of sauna or like hot walking to get some weight off. And then throughout the time, I was like, all right, well, I'll trust what I see and I'll test some things. Like, what happens if I then like fat load him as opposed to carbohydrate load him? Like, it also didn't look necessarily that much better. And what I was starting to notice is every time I would diet him into the show, and then we'd go through this like fairly significant dehydration process to get him to weight, he just got better and better and better and better. So the worse his dieting situation was, the more fluid we had to try and get out of him, the better he got. And then when we'd try and put it all back in, the worse he'd get.
Yeah.
So unfortunately for him, man, his peak week almost for the last 2 shows when he won a world title, and then he won his most recent title he also won. But that was the world title, and before that he won one in Barbados. Like his 2-day out food was like 1,600 calories, very low food. Got a little bit of fat, I think, 1 day out, and he was pretty much like dieted through the nines the whole way.
Yeah. I think I saw this post you put up. Was he in that like Dubai or something, and he was just walking out in the heat for
he walked an hour in full clothes to the weigh-in to make it. Yeah.
And so he's significantly underweight.
No. So he has to be 95, and he again, he's another really interesting. I actually, funnily enough, I've been exposed now to a couple of clients that were born in Nigeria. He's one of them, or have Nigerian heritage. Samson's another one. He's one. You've got Andrew Jack. He's one. And then I had another physique guy at one stage that was from Ghana, but then another one that was also from Nigeria. And it seems to me that like these guys don't need a lot of food because they never ever look bad. So because you'll hear this story even now from Samson, and he doesn't really carbohydrate load. And when you look at his nutrition for like 15 weeks out, he eats absolutely no food for the size of him, right? Like it's tiny. And Joe's very much the same. His ability to tolerate very low food is both great, but it is also seemingly necessary in order to get him lean. So like he could be 100 kilos at 15 weeks out, and then at 2 weeks out, he'll be 99 kilos.
Wow.
He won't change other than in body fat.
Yeah. And
then there's 4 kilos of fluid that we need to basically shift. And then he gets on stage.
It's a good example of how everyone's so different, right? Like the way people respond to drugs, like the peak week, people's careers and things. Like I think he was like working a heavily intensive, like physical.
He's in active military. He's in active military for Belgium still. He's an absolute savage, man.
Yeah. And so his output too, like during the days, I find it incredible how time and time again you bring people in despite all the considerations and things you have to manage. Like especially like I've talked to a lot of high level natural coaches on this podcast, and they've got so much great information, knowledge, wisdom, success, experience. But the one thing that I just don't have an understanding for is all of the implications and considerations that come around the drug use. Like I know the basics of it, but to throw that into the mix, it's such a big factor. And, you know, a lot of these drugs too have other side effects like water retention and things like that. So I imagine that would just, heap on a whole host of other things that you have to manage during that peak week. I guess one of the things, mentioning Brandon Kempter there, one of the things that he's sort of spoken about is like a 3-to-1 ratio in terms of gaining phase or off-season building phase to contest preparation phase. You tend to apply like a 2-to-1 ratio. As a natural athlete versus an enhanced athlete, I guess what are the considerations that come into play there? Well, I was talking to Eric Trexler, and he was saying that, and we were talking about this, in the IFBB, you see a lot of competitors doing 12-week preps and getting ready for stage a lot quicker, whereas I know Brandon does 30 weeks plus in some instances, maybe 24 to 30 weeks, which is where a lot of the research is now, having diet breaks and refeeds and that kind of thing. What's your take on the ratio of off-season building phase to competition preparation phase? And can you have too long an off-season? Can you have too frequent contest prep phases?
I mean, you can definitely have too frequent contest phases. If you're going from season A to season B, a difference of 30 weeks, you're really not giving yourself a great opportunity to grow. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible. I don't have specific ratios because I have a combination of clients that are in the amateur space, but then also like a good chunk of them now that are pros. Depending on where you're at in your career as a pro is going to determine how frequently you should compete as well. You know, like if you're in your mid-30s, your capacity to compete is obviously starting to diminish. But also, like there's a certain element to the pro divisions where being seen frequently, I think, is advantageous for you getting a better look in and being compared to different people. Yeah. And then, you know, depending on the division you're in, there's also like a reduction in available shows to do for an Australian, especially. You know, so like an Australian to compete in a 2-on-2, like Cam George, he really can only bunch a few shows together in August every year in America. Otherwise, he's going to have to fly all around the world, and there's a massive financial cost to that. But I would say, generally speaking, for my amateur guys, I really like about a 75 week. So like it's like a 1.5 year turnaround between shows. Because I find that is sufficient enough to get a lot of growth done, but not so long that it's very hard for them to sustain the goals. And then also, one of the biggest factors then you got too is that if we have to spend more and more time trying to gain more and more weight, then there's also some additional stress. And the thing that drugs do for the untested guys versus the natural range is the same in both directions. You grow muscle faster and you retain more muscle in a deficit, which means that you can grow for a shorter period of time. You can also technically diet for a shorter period of time. It doesn't mean that you should diet for a shorter period of time, in that I don't know if I agree with 12-week preps. For some of my guys, I definitely do this, but it's for the guys that are typically either weight capped and or can't afford to get too heavy from a body fat perspective, because if they do, their weight is going to be astronomical as well. Mike Pearson's a great example of that. Mike Halusi's a great example of that. Even, to be fair, man, most of my pros are a great example of this. It's a lot of demand. Like being a very large human comparative to like what you're supposed to be is actually incredibly fatiguing. Yeah. So, you know, spending 20 weeks and 30 weeks at excessive body weight is wear and tear is huge. So usually the growth phases will be a bit shorter. They can afford to be a little bit more aggressive. And then obviously then the dieting phase can be shorter by virtue of having gained less body fat than what you would typically gain as a natural. And also the fact that you can maintain more muscle mass in a deficit too. But yeah, for the amateur guys, I'd say 75-week turnaround between shows is pretty good. That's going to afford you, honestly, an opportunity to put on at least 3 or 4 kilos of stage weight in the same condition, if you do it well, potentially more. And then for the pros, you might be talking about adding 1 or 2 kilos of stage weight a year, or at least lean tissue. And that can happen in a 50-week turnaround, no problems.
I think it's a fine balance, isn't it? Because during the prep, that's kind of when you're either just trying to preserve muscle or you're catabolizing a little bit of muscle. So, you know, if you're an amateur, you're in your early stages of your bodybuilding career, you kind of want to spend as much time in a building phase, don't you? But if you leave it too long, as you say, like your motivation kind of can wane. So I guess it's that happy medium between doing it too frequently, but also giving yourself enough time to build new tissue to kind of progress.
But then also, man, it's important for you as an individual, if you've got a coach or as yourself, to try and think about and try and objectively figure out like where your groove is.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about, you know, progressive overload in training, a potential overreach, maybe a deload, and then maybe some super compensation, right? Like this is regularly spoken about in training, in that you need to push beyond your capacity, then you need to take a little break, and then you can go again and usually get better each time. There's going to be a tipping point with most individuals with body weight and body fat, whereby it's advantageous for you to get heavier and a little bit more body fat to continue to grow.
Yeah.
in that it drives more performance, you recover very fast, you sleep well, your sex life is good, your social life is healthy, like et cetera, et cetera. And then there's going to be a period where you'll find that it starts to go a bit south for you. And then the question is like, how long should you push that part of the envelope for? So, you know, for example, I have some guys that are very, very, very good at just gaining a couple of 100 grams every couple of weeks. And they might do that for 30 weeks straight. And the drug exposure might slowly work up and they feel great. They look good. They like their life. Everything's fantastic. That's a 30-week growth phase, you know, and they might gain, put in an arbitrary number, 10 kilos, just to pick a number. But then I have other guys that might get to like week 12 or week 13 and they gain that little bit quicker, but then they start to like really suffer in that their sleep turns to shit. They feel uncomfortable. Their digestion slows down to the point where they can't get the food in properly. And then I'd say like, 12 weeks for this person is the sweet spot. And then there's going to be a mishmash of both of these for everyone. So if you can think about where you perform the best, recover the best, feel the best, just beyond that for a little bit of time is suitable. But I think if you continue to push that just by virtue of thinking like, I need to grow more, I need to grow more, I need to grow more, you'll eventually run into a lot more roadblocks than probably what you'll expect.
Do you think there's any benefit for the amateurs or those early in their career to having building phases with either mini cuts or dieting down to a level where they're not experiencing a lot of those side effects which are hampering their sleep and that kind of thing? So getting lean enough to a point where they can kind of recomp, but then build back up without getting to a stage level of conditioning where they are experiencing a lot of those, you know, because as bodybuilders listening to this podcast yourself, you know, like when you get to that last kind of 4 weeks, you know, like you're lucky if you get sometimes 6 to 7 hours sleep a night. You're up urinating all through the night. And I know there's a whole host of other considerations when you are enhanced as well. So like, is that something you would potentially recommend too for someone starting out? Like, don't compete as frequently or get to that level of conditioning. Just get lean enough so you can kind of recomp and then go back into a building phase.
Yeah, I mean, I like them for a multitude of reasons. I think they're good for you in regards to, you know, reestablishing really healthy blood sugar control, because that is the one thing that can skew with higher body fat levels. I think it's very good for like reestablishing appetite and drive to eat. That's really important. It will decrease usually then obviously your body weight, which by virtue of that will put less stress on your system. That's fantastic. And also you can't just grow forever, man. Like, I mean, you technically could grow for 30 or 40 weeks with drugs, but like there's an efficiency point with all of this. Like it's like an inverted U curve, you know, more is better, more is better, more is better until it's not. And then eventually it gets worse and then you have to start again. And this is pretty much the case with drugs. It's pretty much the case with food, with body fat, with body weight, and with even training volume.
Like resensitizing yourself, right?
Yeah, and the cool thing is though is that resensitization happens pretty quickly. It's a lot faster than what I think people probably give it credit. So I am a fan of like the mini cuts being done pretty aggressively, because I just think like that's time wasted not growing. But I know that you can't grow forever either. So that is one thing I think that surprises some people when they come on board with me, is just how aggressive they may be. But, you know, as aggressive as you can tolerate.
One of the things I just wanted to ask you about was, with the IFBB, I think I've heard a little bit of discussion around having like the natural categories in the IFBB. And I was looking up before we came on air, and I think there was like the NPC, natural categories 2025 B season. What's your perspective on that? How do you think that will influence the sport of bodybuilding, particularly the International Federation of Bodybuilding?
My expectation is that it will kind of just fizzle.
Yeah.
Now, so there's been natural. I actually don't know what the technical rules are around what it means to be natural at an NPC event worldwide.
Yeah.
So there used to be an IFBB like Worlds back in the day that was tested, quite obviously not natural, but you know, testing clean. Let's just say that. And like it didn't really get the accolades that the legitimately, you know, sort of recognized natural federations back then, like when I was involved with those, still like the WNBFs and all that kind of stuff we're getting. I just don't. I don't know, man. Like, I think the question is probably better asked to you. Like, as a natural competitor, would you
Yeah.
compete at an IFBB show if it was natural?
See, the thing,
Or is
I'm
it
actually,
kind of like you
yeah,
want to align with the brands that do that align with the philosophy of that particular bodybuilding cohort? Like, if I was a natural bodybuilder and I coached only naturals, would I put them into an IFBB show? I wouldn't actively seek it. I'd say, like, if you want to go for it, but I would actively support the brands that actively support my philosophy, probably. So,
I think I was listening to a podcast with Brian DeCosta, and he won the world champs for the WMBF last year. Um, and he was talking about how he aspires to get a pro card in the IFBB as a natural.
mhm.
And I think for me, I'm at the moment really just enjoying pushing the envelope naturally, but I've had some pretty um, deep discussions, which is I intended to obviously have that chat with you, like an important chat around those considerations. But you have to consider so much. For me, starting a new job, um, other study, other things in your life. When you bring pharmaceuticals into the mix, it creates that whole other consideration. So I think um, definitely something that I think everyone in the sport of bodybuilding considers at some point in time. But I think the one thing for me is that you need to be in it for the right reasons. Like if you're in bodybuilding, natural bodybuilding, because you want to win a pro card or you want to win like at the end of the day, it's great and it's really good that you have that success and you're rewarded with trophy or whatever. But if you're not there to showcase your efforts and for self progression and improvement, like it's very short lived, like your existence I think, in the sport of natural bodybuilding, because I think it is so easy to pass a lot of these drug tests that there's no doubt guys out there that will, like did a urine sample when I won the overalls for A and B men's physique. They did a urine sample, but I could have
Mm.
stopped taking tests like 4 months ago or so, and it's out of my system. I don't know the half life, but I imagine it'd be pretty easy to bypass a lot of those drug tests. So you do see online as well the WMBF, like a lot of these guys like Eric Helms, with showing that their sample, like we drug test, we've got urine samples, and I just wonder how um, like rigorous that testing is. How like is it enough? Obviously, it's an expensive thing, drug testing, right? So how rigorous is it needed to be in order to catch drug cheats? But I think one thing that I would like to do eventually is like just get my toes wet in the IFBB, maybe do like a men's physique comp as an amateur and see how you stack up again, like naturally, like do a few natural shows and then do an IFBB show as a natural in the men's physique category and sort of see where you stack up, see what the physiques look like in comparison to yours. I think it would be worthwhile just to see, whether you like structurally you have what it takes to compete against the best. Obviously, if you go up into classic physique, opens bodybuilding, like in order to be the best of the best, you're going nowhere unless you're on pharmaceuticals. So I think, yeah, you really just need to weigh it up, right? And a lot of people love this sport so much they're willing to die for it. And I think that's the beauty of humanity and the world. You have these decisions to make for yourself, and you create the life you want, right?
Mm. Man, I think elite tier natural bodybuilders can do very well in the IFBB up to about the under 80 kilos.
Yeah,
And then beyond that, it just gets increasingly more difficult because you're not compete. There are guys that are obviously natty that compete under 90 kilograms who are incredible, but typically they're taller. So then they're coming up against guys that are just a lot shorter with so much more muscle. And, but I think up to about 80 kilos is good. And there's guys that have obviously got their pro cards naturally as well. But they almost always end up nowhere thereafter. Obtaining a pro card is far easier than using one these days. Yeah.
Yeah, look at the IFBB in Australia. So with the Nationals, they do give away one pro card per category per year. So it's quite an illustrious thing to get your pro card in the
In
IFBB,
Australia.
in Australia. Yeah.
Yeah. In America, not so much.
Like, is that something to which you might be concerned about if they start to open up a natural category within the IFBB? I know with a lot of the natural federations, that they do throw a lot around a lot of pro cards. So I think, I guess the IFBB has that, the significance of winning that pro card. There's like one a year in Australia. So it's, quite a special honor, I guess.
Yeah, if you win a pro card in Australia, you've earned it. Especially in men's physique, classic physique, and men's open bodybuilding are stacked. I'm speaking of them because I coach men. I'm not super familiar with all of the female divisions in Australia to determine that. Like bikini's always stacked and figure's always pretty stacked. But if you're earning it in Oz, man, you have earned the right to call yourself a pro, I think, legitimately, because you're up against the best of the best for that year. And dude, even being Australians, generally speaking, are very good in regards to their athletic quality. It's just a matter of then getting the opportunity to be exposed to the right places like overseas then thereafter. But earning it in America, I'm more interested in what people do with their cards than I are with them actually having it, if I'm honest. I think earning it is like really cool. It's a really cool accolade to have, and like it's certainly been an achievement of mine as a coach that I've been incredibly proud of. But I'm far more interested in the progress of the individual than I am the accolade of the card, and then also the progress as an individual in the pro ranks and how they perform. Because, like I said, dude, you can go to America and like there are some competitions in America where the top 3 of every division get a pro card. And there are guys that I've seen get those that wouldn't hold a candle to the 10th place guys in Australia. So there are technically pros out there that are nowhere near as good as the large majority of the Australian bodybuilders that I'm exposed to, but they also will do nothing for it. So like, it doesn't really matter.
One of those questions that I think a lot of people probably want to hear from you. I know it's a bit like, like online these days, talking about drugs and that kind of thing is a lot of people are interested in hearing more information about that. But from an insider who's coached so many athletes who are taking these PEDs, just before we kind of wrap things up today, I guess, do you have any like concerns with social media and I guess the way that messages and information kind of propagate from people not like yourself who are well researched, evidence-based, lots of knowledge? Are you concerned about where things are going for a lot of the younger generation, where they're jumping on things like SARMs? I saw the other day in clomiphene, where when like natural athletes are taking a clomiphene to kind of boost their natural production of testosterone, suppress their estrogen, and then without completely suppressing their ability to produce testosterone naturally. Is this a concern for you, do you think, at the moment?
Is it a concern to the level in which the younger generation are taking drugs?
More so just like where they're getting the information from online as well. And I guess to hear, I had Lee Priest on my other podcast and he was talking about how some guys he was at a expo in the United States, or it might have been Great Britain, and he listened to a gentleman tell him that he was on like 5 grams of testosterone or something a week, and it just blew his mind how high the dosages are that a lot of these kids or younger generations are taking.
Yeah, I think we have to take the good with the bad. We are in an information era where the opportunity for you to seek out information for something you're interested in is currently unmatched, right? It's awesome. It's super fucking cool that you can, I mean, if you really wanted to, you could go onto ChatGPT tomorrow and be like, what does clomiphene do to me and what are the concerns that I should have? And it will tell you pretty good information. So it's going to scrape the internet and tell you the best that it can figure out. That is incredibly cool. The same as if you wanted to learn about anything. You could learn about fucking politics, philosophy, you name it, right? You can get wherever you want to get it from. Obviously, the problem with that then is that you can also get bad information. The thing that people are going to have the most difficulty with at the moment is trying to decipher between which one is right, which one is wrong, which one's like somewhere in the middle, what is good and what is bad. So I wouldn't take away the opportunity for education in fear or in preference for the fear of people getting bad information, because I'm an information seeker. I wish to see it everywhere.
Yeah.
is there concern for what they take? I don't know. The problem is like, I don't know whether or not the usages today are actually greater than what they have in the past, or if the frequency of use is greater, or if it's just that our exposure to that
That's what I think.
that conversation now is just more available, because of the information world that we live in. So like, it may be that drug use has increased. I don't know, but it could also just be that discussing drug use has increased.
Yeah. Like you wouldn't expect it when Arnold was training, right? During the Olympia and that, like you wouldn't,
No, I mean, you put it this way. This is a bit of a random side shoot, but I think this is a fair comment to make. I apologize if it's not.
No.
It's not like, if we went back to the 1980s, you may have asked a person like, how many homosexuals in the world do you think that there are? And they might say, I think there's this amount, right? And maybe they thought there was 5%, but there was actually 20%.
Yeah.
And then you come into 2024 and you're like, how many do you think there are? And they're like, probably about 15%. You're like, well, actually, it's still 20%. It's just that now you see the additional 10% because it's available for us to see. So I don't know if we're living in that world with drug use or if we're actually living in a world where the percentage of use has actually gone up. I'm not familiar with that information.
And so, like, I listen to Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson. I think a lot of people do. It's quite a popular podcast now, but he had Chris Bumstead on and Phil Heath, and I think Chris Bumstead was like, oh, he's taken Trenbolone before, but he doesn't take it now just because of the implications on his, the health issues that he's experienced in the past. But like, is there any other drugs out there that I guess you would advise people to, I guess, to be a bit more cautious of or wary of? I think Masteron and testosterone and those are quite relatively safe in their use, and you use them quite frequently if they're used properly.
I think a more appropriate comment is that at least we can leverage there's a greater availability of studies relating to certain drugs and human use than there are others, to the point where we can make more informed or educated guesses on the relative risk profile. So like, in human research, testosterone has been used quite readily. Masteron has been used quite readily. There's some decent stuff on Primobolan. There's a little bit of stuff on, there's a lot on growth hormone for people with like pituitary issues. There's a lot on even things like Anabar. Like there's a whole host of these drugs that we have some like decent research to rely upon that can make us, come to the party with informed, an informed opinion, which I think is super important. There are other ones that are less informed. So like, there are just certain drugs out there that you'll see that people don't really know much about, like DHB is one, Ment is one. There's a whole host of them. They're just not they're not studies. They unfortunately like came about like after the time in which human research on these particular things was no longer available, was considered immoral to ask somebody to take them. So if you lean on the ones that we know have a fairly predictable set of side effects, like the ones that you just mentioned, you're probably going to decrease the likelihood of side effects to a degree. And I mean, like, generally speaking, the over manipulation and or like exogenous control of trying to shut down estrogen should be done very sparingly, if not at all, if you can avoid it. Like that is generally going to be have a greater detriment to your health than leaving it alone. Things like the use of diuretics in peak weeks, they can acutely cause you significant problems if you are unaware of how those things function and work. So they're things that can actually have like legitimate consequences acutely. Like if you take too much testosterone tomorrow, it's not going to do anything to you. Let's just say you accidentally took 10 weeks worth tomorrow. Like you're not going to feel great, but it's not really going to do a hell of a lot. But if you mess up on things like diuretics, that can do a hell of a lot, to the point of putting you in hospital.
Well, I think one of the WBFF competitors actually died last year in that competition.
When people are unaware of the swing and the importance of like potassium and sodium control, and then using diuretics, and they also aren't even aware of the content of their food, and then they're loading on different things, it's a nightmare. like hydration and electrolyte status, I think for some reason is kind of seen as being like a bit of a low concern, because it doesn't seem like, it just has this it just doesn't seem that important or that scary, but it's actually one of the things that can cause you legitimate problems. Yeah. Because those things are involved with, contractility of the heart, and also and how the nervous system innovates with that function. So if you mess around with that, you mess around with your heart, it's a big problem.
All right, Dean, mate, it's been a pleasure to have you on today. Gone over an hour now, so I'll give you your time back. But the tattoo looks good. Do you want to explain maybe the tattoo for the listeners, those that haven't seen it on your Instagram? It's
well, I mean, it's my third one now. It is. So I got it done by a girl here in Spain, in Valencia, called Sylvia Castillo. And she's very good at what she calls micro-realism. So it's a lot of fine line work art. The piece is an ode to human evolution. So if anyone's like watching this, or I have like a chimpanzee skull at the top, which is interconnected with the Vitruvian Man with a DNA helix. The Vitruvian Man was like this Michelangelo version of a previous piece by, I can't remember the original creator of it. It was about like the perfect human, like the shape, like the arms should match to this, and the legs and the heads and so on, which I just think is like cool given the industry that I'm in. And then there's a splice for that, for like its human heart, and then it goes into like a meta man or like AI sort of integration. So it's this crazy, this cascade of evolution. And then I did a bit of a sneaky in the middle of the Vitruvian Man. Not everyone would pick up on this because I haven't got like close pictures of it, but I got Darwin 18:59 tattooed in there as a bit of a. This is funny, man. This is actually relevant to the podcast because you're talking about me poking people. This is kind of a bit of a poke at religion a little bit, in that it's in the form as what you would see a Bible verse. But Darwin 1859 was the year that he released his first book, or his first piece, like his official piece on human evolution. So I just thought,
wasn't it Nature of Species? Was that it?
Yeah.
Nature of Species. Yeah, Charles Darwin.
Yeah,
mate, it's a work of art, and it was a pleasure to have you on. So many great insights. I guess delving into the side of pharmacology side of things is something we haven't really touched on too much in this podcast. So I appreciate all your insights and your knowledge.
No, man, pleasure. It's been a good chat.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Strength Connect podcast. If you enjoyed listening, please don't forget to rate the podcast or subscribe to our YouTube channel for more clips from each episode. Alternatively, you can follow us on all social media platforms using the handle @StrengthConnect.